the scene. He's got the voice that's mean, asking those questions that you never seen. He's got that fire, burning bright and clean. Andrew Keen making waves, break the routine on the Keen on show. He brings the heat, asking the minds, digging deep till they bleed. No sugar-coated truths, no lies to deceive. Andrew Keen, the master of the interview beat. He's got the knowledge, he's got the flair, challenging ideas with a fearless stare. With every question, he's uncovering what's there. Andrew Keen, a truth seeker, he's aware.
Hello, everybody. It is Wednesday, July the 3rd, 2024, a day before Independence Day. And I thought it would be a good opportunity today to think about America, think about liberalism in America with my guest, Celeste Marcus. She's been on the show several times before. She's the managing editor of Liberties Quarterly, and she has an interesting piece out entitled Our Liberalism. It's her pinned piece on her X account, so she obviously likes it. She is joining us from North Carolina. Happy Independence Day, Celeste, early.
Happy Independence Day early.
Should we be celebrating in America, do you think, tomorrow? Or is it a moment for reflection, perhaps even for mourning?
I think that we don't have the right to despair. I think that the founding of this country gave us the tools to defend the rights that are being stripped from us. And I understand being afraid, but I think it's important for us to take time to remind ourselves of what this country was founded on, the ideals that this country was founded on. And July 4th is as good a time as any to do that.
Your piece, Our Liberalism, begins with an astonishing short sentence. Cowards do not skip generations. What did you mean by that in the context of perhaps the crisis of contemporary liberalism in America?
I think there are a lot of people who have facilitated the assault on liberalism in this country, and not least significant among them are people who have simply let it happen and fallen in step with more violent anti-liberal tendencies purely because they were afraid not to. I think that is true of much of the Republican Party. And I think that it feels strange to conceive of ourselves as the people who are responsible for hanging on to our democracy. It sounds incendiary, continues to sound incendiary to people to talk that way, despite proof after proof that that is what's on the line. So I think that most people don't conceive of themselves as evil, and I don't think most people are. I don't know if anybody is, though people can be. But I think that it's easier to recognize cowardice in yourself, and to put pressure on that, I think, is really important for all of us.
You use the words liberalism and democracy in the same sentence. Are they the same thing?
No, they're not the same thing.
Explain why.
I think liberalism, liberal democracy is the fullest kind of democracy, but it's not the only kind. And that's also true of liberalism. A democracy can be a liberal form of government, but it doesn't have to be. Liberalism is just, all it is conceiving of the government primarily as an instrument whose only job is to secure the rights for citizens or for people so that they can live freely. And democracy is a system of government, so not the same thing, but consistent with one another at best.
One of the things I like about what you and Leon are doing at Liberties is you're unashamedly, unabashedly supporters of the liberal idea. Is that fair? Is that the core mission, if you like, of Liberties Quarterly? Of the broad support of liberalism culturally, politically, and personally?
Absolutely. I think that, I mean, that was certainly the conception of it when Leon founded the journal and when I helped him found the journal. I know that we talk about this a lot. I think about it a lot because culture and politics both play a role in buttressing liberalism. I think certainly in the last week, I've been incredibly frustrated at the terrible job that our culture has done in explaining to American citizens how essential our liberalism is, not just for ourselves, but for the world. And I'm more convinced now than I've ever been, just having been in my role since the founding of the journal, which really, like, I've been managing editor of Liberties. Most of my tenure there has been under Biden, not Trump. And it's just watching us become complacent, losing sight of what it means to be dedicated to the principles of this country. And I think most mainstream publications, all mainstream publications are not full-throated liberals. And so it definitely is a responsibility that we conceive of ourselves as having.
I don't want to go all ageist on you, Celeste, but you and Leon Wieseltier, your partner at Liberties, you're certainly of different generations. You're obviously much younger, 2 or 3 generations younger than him. Your interesting piece on liberalism focuses on the generational quality of liberties, of liberties, of liberalism itself. You can't, of course, speak on behalf of your generation, just as Leon can't be the quintessential pre-boomer or whatever other generation he falls into. But is there, do you think, a generational difference between your generation and how they think about liberalism, freedom, democracy, and previous generations?
I'll answer it, of course, because we live in a time when our rights are being stripped from us. And the point of liberalism is to defend citizens' rights. So that wasn't true for liberals coming up, in Leon's generation. Cold War liberals are not the same as 2024 liberals. We're facing a very different threat. We're facing an opponent who is fascistic. And who may well be the next president of the United States and who already was the president of the United States. That's never happened before. The Supreme Court just gave the president unprecedented immunity to commit crimes. So it's not the same fight that it's ever been before. And that's always true of the fight for values. Values have to be defended in different ways depending on the threats that the age poses. So I think that, like, it's true that it has changed, but not because I've changed or because liberalism itself has changed, but because the times have changed, the threats have changed. I don't know that somebody with the exact same philosophical and political commitments would sound the way that I do in the 19th century, because they would have had other things to deal with. The threats would have looked different to them.
Yeah, I'm certainly not going to claim to speak on behalf of Leon. He can speak for himself, and we'll get him on the show at some point. But some people might say, Celeste, well, of course, the Republic has faced equally existential threats, from the right-wing terrorism of the 90s to obviously much of the violence of the 1960s, to the fascism of Joe McCarthy in the 1950s. What's different today? Why are you arguing that what your generation is facing, and I'm assuming it's with Trump or certainly with right-wing republicanism, is any different from what's happened historically?
I don't even understand that question. How could it not be different? You just gave examples of other things that happened. This is something that has never happened before. Just like McCarthyism was something that had never happened.
When you say this, what do you mean?
I mean, the ascendance of Trump, having 6 Supreme Court justices on the bench who are committed to making rulings that will change the way that we live. I mean, they took, in my generation, under a Democratic presidency, I was stripped of a right as a woman in this country, I was stripped of a right. That had never happened before. I mean, they had to fight for abortion. There was a time when they were fighting for abortion. They had it, and then it was taken away. So I just, of course, the times are different than they've ever been before. That's tautological. That's definitionally true.
Your piece touches on, if not generational warfare, certainly, and I'm quoting you here, the insipid, ironic cynicism of the generation between mine and the boomers who have gotten us into this absurd fever pitch. Is there some ill will, at least for you personally, on the behavior of boomers? Are they the ones who have got us into this?
The cynicism is not the boomers. It's the generation between us and the boomers.
And what about the boomers? So perhaps you might lay out a generational narrative of how we've ended up in this state.
I mean, I think there are so many competing factors, and I don't think generational differences explain most of them. I do think that there was an attitude amongst liberals that are like millennial liberals, that defending liberalism was gauche, that it was unfashionable. And that's why we don't have the language for explaining why what's being taken away from us is so horrific. I think that was a failure of liberal leaders. And I think that's a failure of liberal leaders in the generation just above mine. And I think it's a failure of liberal leaders who are like the editors in chiefs of mainstream publications. And then I think, like, obviously the threat that the fact that Biden is the nominee right now, and that we're having a serious discussion about whether or not he is too old to be the nominee, I that speaks for itself. I don't think I have to say more than that, except like he should have spent the last 4 years choosing a successor and making that successor powerful politically. He could have done that, and the right has done such a good job of raising the next generation of conservative leaders. They're very powerful. They are well placed. If Trump was hit by a bus, there would be somebody to take his place. And that's not true on the left. We're scrambling to try and find somebody who can make any kind of case for their leadership. I mean, so yes.
So what's gone wrong, Celeste, on the left? You mentioned Biden. I want to come back to him later in this conversation. But there's also Ginsburg, other progressive or supposedly progressive politicians who haven't resigned. Is there some sort of weird connection between progressives and their inability to give up power, whether it's Biden or Ginsburg or other?
I think we're just bad at strategizing, and I don't know why that is. That wasn't always true. The civil rights movement was such a huge success in this country, and they were so good at making a difference and not just explaining philosophically why the fight had to happen, what was so important about defending the rights of the weakest among us, but also of organizing and making sure that the leaders on the ground in the states were doing what they had to do to defend the rights of minorities. The right is now just so much better at that than we are. They're just much better at political organization. It's complacency, I guess. I think that there's something seductive about being popular in culture, and that can distract progressive leaders from making a difference in their constituents' lives. I don't really know why. I mean, I think everybody is kind of scratching their heads trying to figure out why we're here. But I do think that I know that for me, like, I know what's missing. I know what I was not bequeathed. I don't know why I wasn't bequeathed it, but I know that it's very clear what my job is. I don't like think to myself, I wonder what I can do. I know what I can do. I know what I wasn't shown how to do. I know that there are young writers around the world who want us to defend liberalism, to defend freedom, because whether we like it or not, we are the most powerful force for liberalism in the world. If the United States stops being a champion of liberalism, liberal movements around the world will not have an ally, and that is how we're living. The people who defended American patriotism most beautifully in the last decade were in Hong Kong, and we don't have like the waving American flags in Hong Kong because what they want is freedom and democracy. And we have anti-Trump rallies, and we have pro peace rallies. We don't have pro democracy rallies, and that's a failing. That's a cultural failing. We need to teach ourselves how to value our own, the American promise, what we promise, what we signify, the American symbolism that Democrats around the world rally around, whether we like it or not. That is our role, and we need to.
What about Black Lives Matter? Wasn't that a manifestation of popular support for liberalism and democracy?
Not democracy. It was a popular support for liberalism, and it was a great movement. And I'm proud that we actually managed to sustain it for an entire summer. The blowback was incredibly strong. It was not the same as, civil rights, which really did successfully secure rights for people. Black Lives Matter didn't do that in the summer.
Let's come back to the generational thing, Celeste. And again, I don't want you to speak. Maybe I don't want you. Obviously, it's a stupid question for you to speak on behalf of your generation. But what does a younger person like you? What can you tell the Feinsteins, the Ginsburgs? Not that she's around anymore. The Joe Bidens of the world. What can you bring to the discussion of liberalism that these people who seem all too complacent and all too pleased with themselves haven't thought about?
Oh, God. What I would say is their responsibility is to create programming to find the next generation of liberal leaders and give them all of the resources that they have. And I cannot understand why they're not doing that. It's possible. It's entirely possible. These are some of the most powerful people in the world. They could be doing that. They could be securing a democratic future. They could be arming the next generation of leaders with real resources that they need, and connections, networking, just the language to understand that this country has their backs. They should be doing that for Democrats in, the West Bank. They should be doing it for people in Syria and for dissidents in Iran. I mean, there's so many brilliant young people who are desperate to have them as allies. I cannot understand the complacency. It's hard for me not to interpret it as selfishness.
Yeah, you do understand it. You're being polite, perhaps excessively polite. Are these people just power hungry, too pleased with themselves?
I don't understand it, Andrew. I genuinely don't understand it. I mean, I'll tell you why. I was raised in a right-wing community where they are incredibly effective at doing exactly this, and it is about power. It's not you can be power hungry and also interested in controlling the future. And I'm not sure why they aren't doing that. I'm not asking them to be virtuous. I'm not asking them to be altruistic. They could be really good friends with the next president of the United States if they could just find her. I don't understand why they don't think of it that way. It is how the right thinks about it. The right wants influence. They want their policies put in place. They know that the only way to do that is to get the people that they support and they nourish into power. It's just bad strategy. I wish that they were narcissistic in that way.
If you could take them by the hand, a Feinstein, a Biden, where would you take them? Who would you introduce them to?
Activists, writers who are already trying to do this, young people in law schools who should be taught how to read the Constitution as a document that can be as a real resource, as a very important, powerful tool. They're out there. They're not hard to find.
Yeah, it's I share your frustration. It's bewildering why they've clung to power for so long.
It's really upsetting. I mean, I really do feel as if we were so monumentally betrayed by just poor planning. It's really difficult to overstate the importance of political planning, and they just didn't do it. And I don't, as I say, I don't know why. It was an enormous dereliction of duty.
If one was writing a novel, the final scene, or perhaps the penultimate scene, would have been the debate last week with Biden, clearly way too old to even be out on his own, let alone be president of the country. Is this the final scene, Celeste, or are there scenes still to come?
It's so funny that you say that. That night changed my life, and it definitely felt like the opening scene of a novel for me. I felt I've been talking to friends of mine all week, talking about what we can do, what we have to do. This was an invitation. This was an invitation to the next generation. If the boomers are not going to put down the mic, then we have to pick it up. We have to take it out of their hands. And that's going to be true whoever the nominee is and whoever wins the election this year. This is where we are.
I'm surprised that you were surprised. You're based in DC, if not a political insider, you know a lot of people. Why were you surprised? Did you expect Biden to come out as a sharp-witted president?
I think it's crazy that anyone would behave as if they're not surprised unless they spent time with the president.
I wasn't surprised, and what do I know?
You weren't surprised?
No,
really?
I've been moaning about this for months on the show, getting a lot of criticism for
good
being
for you,
so
Andrew.
cynical of Biden. But I'm not patting myself on the back. I think I'm not sure. I'm surprised that you were surprised. So what did you expect of Biden?
I expected State of the Union. I expected him to make a case for democracy, which he did not do. I expected him to use language like he's used before about what America represents, and he didn't do that. Yeah, I was not expecting this.
What about the historical analogies? I know earlier you corrected me to suggest that maybe history isn't always the best guide, but are we back in the late 60s in a sense, especially with this 60s? Upcoming convention in Chicago?
I'm thinking 30s.
30s in what sense?
I think that I'm scared about the state of the world, not just this country. And I think that hatred for the least powerful, the most vulnerable, is rampant. I think it's what characterizes the Trump presidency. He got where he is by implying that some Americans are more American than others, starting with Barack Obama. I mean, that's how he got where he is in the Republican Party, by assuring a certain demographic that they get better treatment than everybody else because their Americanness is more real. 60% of Christians in this country want America to be a Christian country, even though they know that that's unconstitutional. That's what we're up against. And the erosion of minority rights, and it's not just going to be minorities. We are going to increasingly live in a country in which we can't trust law enforcement to have our backs, in which we don't really know whether or not the rights that we were promised when we were born, whether or not we can really depend on them to be honored by the government. I can't understand how we're acting as if January 6th didn't happen and the 4 years before it didn't happen. We know who this man is, and we know who his supporters are and what they want, what their vision of this country is. And he really could win. And even if he doesn't, I mean, the Supreme Court is incredible. So I just feel like I did a Q&A with the director Agnieszka Holland for her new movie, Green Border.
The Polish film director.
Yeah, brilliant woman. Her best known movie is called Europa, Europa, which is about the Holocaust. And in this conversation, which was fascinating, and a great privilege for me, she said that the common mode in human history, in human life, is illiberalism, because people feel loyalty to their own, and they will believe, whether this is true or not, that according other people's rights strips them of their own. And that propensity for evil, was kind of scared out of us collectively as a planet. During World War II, we were afraid of what was done, and that was sort of that acted as a buttress against those impulses for several decades, but it's worn off. And she said that Green Border, which takes place in Poland, it's about ping ponging Syrian and Afghan refugees back and forth across the Belarusian and Polish border, which is still happening. And the way that people talk about immigrants in Europe, which is, by the way, a lot like the way that people talk about immigration in this country. I mean, the way that Trump talked about immigrants and Biden didn't correct him. Biden just let him say what he was like. He said they're raping our women and stealing our jobs, and this man's letting him in. And Biden was like, I'm not letting them in, which is a disgusting way for an American president to talk. Both of them.
Well, he also, that triggered some sort of incoherent response. And of course, the two men, we talked about this in a show earlier this week, are united in a bizarre way on China.
Yeah.
So we've talked about an alternative in your Our Liberalism piece. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but you talk about something called decency, public decency. It's a sort of Orwellian response, perhaps, or certainly what Orwell responded to totalitarianism, left and right wing totalitarianism in the 1940s. Is this what you're calling for, an embrace of something called decency?
I'm calling for several things. I think that, liberalism is dependent. It is basically a faith. It's dependent on the faith that human beings are born with inalienable rights. That was revolutionary, just that idea. The idea that by virtue of being born, a person has rights. That wasn't true. I mean, that like couldn't be thought of. A country had never been founded on a principle like that before. The only reason America was because we weren't getting our rights as British citizens. So we had to think of a different reason why we had rights. It was kind of like an accident, this crazy blip in human history, that we were founded on this idea. That idea affirms that people have worth, and it really is a bulwark against allowing yourself to hate and dehumanize others. And that is such a powerful impulse in people, to hate others just because they're not like them, to say they don't have rights. I don't need to think of them as fully human because they're not like me. That proclivity, that appetite, it's like libidinal, this hatred that people have for people who are unlike them, is illiberal. And it is really like the fuel that is running all of these movements. It's so dangerous. And I think like there are many things that have to happen, but I see the way we talk to each other. This is definitely true on X, which is unfortunately like our marketplace of ideas. People are so cruel. And it's like baked into human interaction that we're conceding this already, just by virtue of the way that we talk to one another. This snideness, the nastiness. Even liberals who are defending liberal principles are doing it in a liberal way when they talk to people as if they are not fully human. And it's so important that we don't let ourselves do that. It really begins in the heart and mind. And I think it becomes really difficult to support the presidency and the political project of a person who thinks that other people are subhuman if you are constantly in human interaction affirming other humanity. So yes, I think that decency has a lot to do with it. It's not all of it.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
there
in
are
the Our
people who are
Liberalism
fascists
piece,
too.
you talk about, and I'm quoting you here, fascism has met social media. Jonathan Haidt, of course, has a best-selling book suggesting that that social media should come with guardrails and perhaps even kids shouldn't have access to it. How central is social media in what you see as this contemporary fascism, this hatred?
It's impossible to extricate the one from the other. It's very important. It's important all over. Um, Fascists use it as a tool for normalization, for proliferation. Liberals should be using it too. I mean, I just think we should learn from some of their tactics. It's very important.
And do you agree with Haidt? Should it be restricted? Is there a responsibility for regulation if we're to
Absolutely, it should be
save
regulated.
democracy, save liberalism?
I think it can help, and we need all hands on deck.
Coming back to Biden, you had an interesting X piece on Jill Biden, and I'm quoting you, said, not the primary concerning fact in America, however, incredibly frustrating that the most powerful woman in this country has the capacity to alter the trajectory of the free world by virtue of being someone's wife. What do you make of Jill Biden's role in this?
It's very strange to me. I mean, I think it feels atavistic. This is historically the way that women have exerted power, is just by being married to people who actually have power. And that feels very weird. It's just a strange thing. This is, of course, it would be true if it was a woman who was president, but of course it's not, and it probably won't be. Just this person has so much power. It felt like very Abigail Adams, and that was a long time ago.
Yeah, it's odd that people are saying that it's not just the wife, but the sister of Biden have the most influence on him. How does that fit into the narrative of the peculiar relations between genders in the history of American liberalism?
It's so crazy. It's so crazy that this is still where we are, that we've not advanced far enough, that people with power hang on to it. They're like,
Yeah,
just
people with power hang on to it.
Yeah.
And well, so Celeste, you put me off tomorrow. What am I supposed to do? I think you put our whole audience off. What are you going to do tomorrow on July 4th?
I'm going to celebrate the ideas that this country was founded on, because I know that I have so many more resources than my friends who are protesting the government in Tel Aviv do. I know that this country promises freedom, that it does believe that every human being has equal rights, and that should not be forgotten. This is like, it would be a dereliction of duty to give up. Actually, I want to, this is how I'll end, because I think it's a beautiful American sentiment. Sotomayor said, this was months ago, but I was rereading it because it made me feel better.
The Supreme Court Justice
Sonia Sotomayor said, you can't throw up your hands and walk away. That's not a choice. That's abdication. That's giving up. How can you look at heroes like Thurgood Marshall, like the freedom fighters who went to lunch counters and got beaten, like John Lewis, who marched over that bridge in Selma and got his head busted open? How can you look at those people and say you're entitled to despair? You're not. I'm not. And that's how I feel. And she also said, change never happens on its own. Change happens because people care about moving the arc of the universe towards justice. It can take time and it can take frustration. It's your turn to carry that burden, to show what you're willing to do and what sacrifices you're willing to take, and figure out how to make things better. I live in frustration. Every loss truly traumatizes me in my stomach and my heart. But I have to get up the next morning and keep on fighting. And that is how I feel. It's our responsibility to fight.
So that's beyond Orwellian decency. It's agency, political agency.
Yeah.
Well, Celeste Marcus, I'm not sure if we can have a happy 4th of July, but I think we can have a happier one. Having talked to you, we'll get you back on the show to brighten up our lives, or make us at least think a little bit more. Celeste Marcus, honor to have you. managing editor of Liberties Quarterly. Have a great 4th of July, and we'll talk to you again in the not too distant future. Thank you so much.
Sounds good, Andrew.
Can I step on the sea?